Welcome, everybody, and thanks for being with me this next hour. You are listening to Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks on Transcendental Tuesdays. Hopefully, they will stay transcendental. That's what they've always felt like to me. We are broadcasting live on 12radio.com and simulcasting on my YouTube channel, which is the same name as the radio show, Everyday Astrology with C.A. Brooks. So you can join us and listen there. Either way, and you can also find archives on both of those sites as well. So if you miss part of a show or you just want to go back and pick something up, you can always go to either of those sites and find the archive shows. So if you're listening live, this is September 2nd, 2025. And thank you to all of you who are already on the chat over on YouTube. It's good to see you, Renee and Leslie and Gypsy Skies Caravan. Thank you so much. And I know there's some others too, but we're going to just get going here in September. And on today's show, it really is a busy, busy week. And that includes the fact that Saturn, that planet of discipline, returned to Pisces yesterday. Mercury is going into Virgo today. Uranus is going to begin a retrograde pattern on Friday. And there's a full moon total lunar eclipse. That's a mouthful, right? Full moon total lunar eclipse. That's going to be in Pisces on Sunday. Now, any one of those could take up the whole show. And I really debated, do we just pick out one of those and just talk about that? Or do we kind of do an overview? And I decided to do an overview. We'll touch upon, all of those if we have the time to just kind of give you a heads up maybe of how they work. And also to just, what is the week going to look like? So, but don't fret. I always tell you that I do write a column the week ahead in Mark's Power Peak. That is a weekly newsletter that comes out every Saturday night. It is free. Obviously, when I say comes out, it's electronic, it's digital. You can go to 12listen.com and subscribe for free. And then it just comes to your email box every Saturday night. And in that column, you're going to find a lot of the things that I talk about on this show, because that's what I'm talking about the week ahead, maybe the month ahead in terms of the show. We may be focusing on something in particular, but you're going to find the details there. So if you want to go back and say, okay, when did she say that Mercury thing was happening? Or when was she talking about that eclipse? You're going to find it in that column, the week ahead in Mark's Power Peak. So go check that out. So let's get started, though, because we do have a number of things to cover today. And I'm going to go chronologically, but only sort of. And I say that because Saturn did go into Pisces yesterday, but I'm going to save that for the second item in the show. And mostly because Mercury's move to Virgo, I think, is very important. And that is happening today, which here again, it's Tuesday, September 2nd. So I want to make sure that we really cover that. And I don't want to, give that the short stick. So Mercury in Virgo. And it's important for a number of reasons. Anytime a sign changes or anytime a planet changes signs, you want to pay attention to it. How is it going to start manifesting? How is it, if you think of this as a whole recipe or as maybe a stage play, well, Mercury's changing his clothes. He's still the communicator. He's still the planet of thinking. But now he's going to come on stage in a completely different costume. He has a different agenda for those communications. And this one I think is important also because he was in Leo for a very, very, very long time. Now, those of you who do astrology or you follow it, Mercury moves pretty quickly. It's a planet that's very, very close to the sun. And so it changes signs every 2 to 3 weeks. But when it goes into a retrograde pattern, which it did this past July, so part of July, part of August, it was retrograde. Well, it settled into Leo for 65 days. Because in fact, that retrograde did not take Mercury back into Cancer. It stayed in Leo that entire time. So 65 days for Mercury to be in a sign is a very, very long time. So hopefully we really got something out of that in terms of really getting into, being able to speak our minds, finding out what's in our hearts, what's in our passions, and really being self-expressive, because that's the sign of Leo. But now and it's probably not going to seem abrupt, but it's going to change, today. And I think this is a good thing because truthfully, Mercury rules Virgo. So he feels very, very comfortable. And I always refer to him as a he, just, don't mind me. I personify all these planets and signs, but he moves into familiar territory. So I think that's going to feel good. It's going to be regenerating. It's kind of like, it's that sense of there's no coincidence that the fall is the time in many cultures where you go back to school, right? So you're sharpening the pencils, you're buying all the supplies, you're getting your book bag, you're deciding on the classes that you're going to take, or, maybe it's kindergarten and you're getting your box of crayons. But it's that time we're gearing up for learning something new, maybe meeting some new people, but specifically for learning something new. So Mercury is going into one of his home signs. Gemini, by the way, is the other sign that he rules. But he goes into Virgo, and he's only going to be there for 16 days. That's a really short time. But of course, that's what happens, especially after a retrograde. He's getting back up to speed. So he's only going to be there for 16 days before he moves into Libra. But here's a few things. And, I like to look at the big picture. So here are a couple of things that I'm looking at that intrigue me, that I think are interesting about what Mercury is doing right now. Mercury's entry into Virgo is occurring really only a few days before we're going to have that full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces that's going to happen on Sunday. And then when Mercury changes the next time, it's going to be on September 18th. And that's going to be just a few days before the partner eclipse, because those eclipses, they always come in pairs. Now, sometimes there's 3 eclipses in a row, but there's always 2, a new moon, full moon, or full moon, new moon. So the next eclipse is going to be that new moon solar eclipse. That one's going to be in Virgo on Sunday, September 21st. So it intrigues me that Mercury literally changes signs before each of these eclipses. And I can't help but think this is an important message, or this is really gearing us up or reminding us of the importance of our thoughts and the power of our minds. And by the way, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but eclipses are harbingers of new information and impending change. So once again, using those talents of Mercury in a very intentional and purposeful way can be an important advantage in navigating those transitions that are suggested by the eclipses. And, that's what I find. When I look at these eclipses, sometimes I say time speeds up. Well, it doesn't really speed up, but sometimes it's almost like something we've been waiting for all of a sudden comes to us. Information that we've been waiting for, messages that we've been waiting for, or even something comes to us. Maybe we didn't even know we were waiting for it, but a lot of people feel, especially in retrospect, that when they look back on these pairs of eclipses, that something significant changed in their lives. And already I felt this. I've been working with somebody who has been working with an issue at work since July. And it's been one of these things, okay, wait. And every time that person initiates, then the boss or the other people involved just go, wait, it's not time. And so it's been a very frustrating situation of just wait and see. And interestingly enough, as an astrologer and doing tarot and some other oracles, every time he consults me, it's the same message. Okay, not yet, wait. And now all of a sudden he gets the call, he gets the text, we're meeting, we're going to start talking. And I thought, how funny, because I had told him a few days ago, eclipses are coming. Something's going to change. Something is going to happen. So there again, it's not like you have to just, stand in the yard and hold your hands out or something, but just be expectant that there's new information coming in and there's something going on. And sometimes you don't even know that it's happening until after it happens. Like, for instance, this is one of the fun things about astrology. Oftentimes, if I'm working with somebody and we go back and we look, when did you meet that person? Or when did that event happen? Or when did you find out about that job being posted? Oftentimes, I can tie it to an astrological event in their chart. But specifically, a lot of times it's an eclipse. So you're just going through your workday and you meet somebody at the coffee shop or something, even minor seems to change or shift. And all of a sudden, 2 months later, so it's not all of a sudden, but 2 months later, that turns out to be your new boss, or that turns out to be somebody really significant in your life. So as usual, what I say is just pay attention. Just pay attention to what's going on and expect that your life is working in amazing ways. But the other reason I want to make sure that we don't ignore Mercury and Virgo is because we really are in the season of Virgo. The sun is there right now. And if you remember, when the sun moved into Virgo that very same day, we had a new moon in Virgo, which means that we're still under the influence of that particular lunar cycle. And because that new moon happened right then when the sun had moved into Virgo, we have a second Virgo new moon. Now, see that, I'm not going to say it's rare. It happens maybe once a year, but it doesn't usually happen. We usually have one new moon per sign. Well, this time we're going to have another new moon. It's going to be on September 21st. So we're going to have another lunar cycle that is governed by Virgo, but that one's going to be the solar eclipse. So there again, those eclipses often work just like kind of shutting down the computer and rebooting. Whatever the system is, you're rebooting. So I want you to pay attention to Virgo. Now I realized, a couple of shows ago, I think it was August 19th. Well, we did a really deep dive with Virgo. So I'm not going to go over all those details again. But by the way, if you didn't hear that show, I think it was August 19th. Go find it on YouTube. You can find it under the tab that says live, or you can go to 12radio.com and you can find it under the tab that says on demand. But I am going to review just a few of the basics, especially, maybe you're new, maybe you haven't heard this at all. So Virgo is an earth sign. It belongs to that category. It's pragmatic, it's grounded, it's dependable. But all the signs are also part of a modality group. And this one is mutable. And that means it's identified as having double personalities or maybe two distinct sides to its personality. And the others are like the Pisces fish, swimming in two directions, the Gemini twins, or the Sagittarian centaur that is half horse, half man. So this is a sign too that has a double personality. And in some ways it's that, it's the divine struggle for Virgo because she is divine. She has high ideals. She's a goddess. And yet she's living in a very flawed and imperfect world. So that, keep that in mind, that's what we're always dealing with. What is it like to be a spiritual being having a human experience? But in this case, we become very aware of it when we're in the season of Virgo. And sometimes we can get, kind of frustrated, more than kind of, we get frustrated. Maybe we even get a little depressed at it. Like, how do we make this work? But this is an excellent time to just, to just watch yourself and to think through some of those issues. Like, how do we deal with that? And what do we do when things aren't just perfect? Or that we find that we can't make ourselves perfect in a way that we want to. I would also remind you that 2025, according to numerology, is a number 9 year. Well, that corresponds to the hermit archetype in the major arcana, and that is the card for Virgo. So see, everywhere you look, you kind of see Virgo, and you also see the hermit. So if any of those things appeal to you, shutting out distractions so that you can see what's really important, or doing a level of prioritizing your life in a way that you haven't done before, especially with Mercury, taking control and dominion over your thought. See, I think that's a lot about what Mercury in Virgo is like. So take control and have dominion over your thoughts, because more so than anything else, paying attention to the environment that you're in. Pay attention to what's coming into your head, what's coming into your minds. Now, that doesn't mean that you look around and label everybody or everything as toxic. I can't deal with you, you're just toxic. I am not suggesting we do that, but I'm suggesting we be discerning, that we think about what we're exposing ourselves to. And maybe that means limiting the amount of time that you watch certain kinds of television or listen to certain newscasts or spend time with certain people. Or maybe you just say to them, I'm really making an effort to be more positive, to be more kind in my life. And, I would like it if you would go along with me on that. Or however, you know what I mean? Because I think what we find with Mercury in its home sign, our thoughts really are a little more systematic. We may even find that it's easier. This is a time for building habits or routines, because that is Virgo. So we may feel more serious and organized about our communications. We might feel like we're getting serious about writing or public speaking or teaching, and specifically learning. As I said, this is back to school time. So we can really work on routines and habits. And, maybe it's something that we specifically pick out and say, I really want to learn that. I want to go deeper with that. That's something I would really like to add to my repertoire, whether it's personal or it's professional. We embrace perfection, practicality, and efficiency. And definitely, we're so much more disciplined in terms of our language, our writing, our editing, our speaking. But we are very eager to learn something new. And by the way, another interest, or some of the interests of Virgo, include nutrition and health and healing. So if any of those are appealing to you, like maybe you do want to change your diet, maybe you want to look a little bit deeper into some healing modality like acupuncture or massage or something very different, those are Virgo favorites. She loves to look at those kinds of things and put all that together. She loves to gather that information and collate it together and come up with something. So this is the time to adopt the mind of the student, or to emulate the behavior of the hermit. Really think about that. And I would also always encourage you, really, to sharpen both your rational skills and your intuition. Don't go one way or the other. And I will admit, Mercury in Virgo is very rational. But I think this is also a good time for intuition, especially with Saturn moving back into Pisces. Now, before we leave this, there's a couple more things I want to say, though. One of them is notice the shadow of Virgo, and it's the attachment to perfection. We want things to be perfect. We want to do something until it just can't go wrong. But really think about that. Even though this is a good time for habits, etc., and routines, we want them to serve us, not the other way around. We do not want to be kind of just totally indebted or, wrapped up into a particular habit that it's like, it's got to go that way. If I don't get up at 8:15 in the morning, if I don't drink coffee at such and such, if I don't have my smoothie, then my whole life falls apart. Those habits are for our use. They should serve us, not the other way around. So when you find something really getting out of control, that's another, Virgo thing of like, okay, maybe you need to reprioritize what's going on there, but really try to work to not use that perfection, that critical mind. And when I say critical mind, I mean critical thinking, being able to sort things into categories, being able to understand what's right, what's wrong, what doesn't fit in this puzzle. That's critical thinking, but don't use it in the other way. Critical, as in criticizing other people. Really pay attention to, are you being really super critical of yourself, of other people, of a situation in your life? Because if you are, then just look at that and say, you know what, that's what you're doing to yourself. It's coming from inside and you're feeling critical of yourself. But take the time to shut out those distractions. Be the hermit. Listen to your inner voice and pick up the gleam of your inner lighthouse, your inner light. So, leaving this idea, take control and dominion over your thoughts. But also, I want to just kind of give you a heads up. What happens is, as we've talked about, those planets that have all recently moved, Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, guess what? They sit at the very beginning of those signs. And now in a couple cases, they're slipping into the signs that they just came out of. What happens? Every time a planet changes signs, there they sit. And they're a welcoming committee. Now, are they a fun welcoming committee? Are they saying, hey, come on in, I've got your back? Or are they saying, hey, there's something we need to talk about. We need to make an adjustment here. Well, what's going to happen with Mercury moving into Earth, into Virgo, right before Mercury moves, he makes an inconjunct. That's one of those, what I call a cranky kind of aspect. He's going to do that with Saturn and Pisces. So in some ways, he's not feeling so good about that particular, aspect. We're not feeling so good about that. Then Tuesday, and by the way, Mercury enters Virgo he already did it, 6:23 this morning. That is Pacific time. But now Tuesday, tonight, he's going to make an inconjunct, another one of those cranky aspects, this time with Neptune that's sitting right there at 0 Aries. And so once again, it's kind of like, I'm having a hard time putting these ideas together. And then Wednesday, Mercury makes a square to Uranus, the planet of individuality. And then also on Wednesday, Mercury's in conjunct Pluto in Aquarius. So quite truthfully, with planets moving into Virgo, they're not real happy with those 4 planets that are almost acting like gatekeepers. They're not real happy. They're going, oh my God, this is a rough road. How do I deal with this? So I want you to know, if you wake up tomorrow morning especially, and you're just feeling a little overwhelmed, and you go, who cares? I don't want to anymore, Why is it me that has to save the world? Or why is this all falling on my shoulders? If you're feeling overwhelmed, that's kind of to be expected. And the moon is also going to be opposing Jupiter in Cancer, which means that a lot of people under that kind of energy are very emotional and dramatic. This is the drama queen kind of energy. So that's what we've got going on tomorrow. And even though we have Mars in Libra, which is saying, okay, guys, this is all about relationship. This is all about being kind to each other. The moon is squaring it tomorrow. So, there's just a whole lot of stuff going in that just makes me think that, we might wake up and through the day, we might just feel a little overwhelmed with all this energy. But what I want you to know is it's transient. It moves very quickly. But an idea that I always come back to for myself, and I'm putting it out there to you, is hold fast to a spiritual toolbox. Do you have a spiritual toolbox? Do you have those ideas that you always go back to when you know that you need help, that you need to calm? Is it meditation? Is it a spiritual practice? Everybody's got all kinds of things that they do. Maybe it's a crystal, and you pull the crystal out, you hold it in your hand. Maybe it's doing a certain meditation or seeing yourself as, some kind of cleansing ritual. Really think about that. It's not something that, even though, yes, the spiritual toolbox, for the most part, you don't see it, but know what those practices are that you can always pull out quickly to just ground yourself and to figure out what's going on. And the other thing I always put these words together: prioritize what's important and then delegate what somebody else can do, postpone something that doesn't need to be done today, or cancel something that truthfully doesn't need to be done today or ever. So prioritize, delegate, postpone, and cancel, depending on what your thinking is about something in particular, okay? So, and hopefully you'll just sail through tomorrow. But if you don't, just go, it's a little overwhelming. I got to figure this out and just keep my feet on the ground. All right, so let's move to that Saturn backtracking into Pisces. By the way, a number of people are coming into our chat room. Thank you very much to Kim and Pamela. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so Saturn, when I say backtracking, of course, he is going retrograde right now. Now, as a reminder, Saturn entered Aries in May, and Saturn changes signs every 2.5 years. So in May, it left Pisces and went into Aries. But Saturn also is one of those planets that retrogrades every single year, stays retrograde for maybe 4 months, maybe a little more. And so it retrograded on July 12th at 2 Aries. So it barely got into Aries and then it went retrograde. So now what we find is yesterday it went right back into Pisces, which to me is always that symbol. Okay, I'm not quite finished with this sign yet. There's something that I need to pick up. There's something that I need to look at again. Now, by the way, Saturn will return to direct motion in November, the end of November, November 27th. And he will, he's only in those last few degrees of Pisces, by the way. So if you're a person, you've got your sun at 26, 27, 28, you go, oh, he's coming back. What did I forget? What do I need to put into place? Where's the discipline that I need in my life? But Saturn will retrace those last few degrees in Pisces and then will re-enter Aries on February 13th. And by the way, I love that. It makes me smile. The day before Valentine's Day is when Saturn is, going right back into Aries. I think it's going to be an interesting thing about relationships because, of course, Aries is independent. So I think it's a good sign for people that really want to have equal and independent relationships. So it's fun. It's just, one of those little coincidences. I don't know if there are in astrology, and then of course, Saturn is going to be in Aries until April of 2028. So few years here, we've got Saturn in Aries, but that kind of gives you an idea of what's going on there. But just quickly, what does it mean to have, Saturn in Pisces? Well, once again, he's been there for 2.5 years. Pisces is about creativity, about imagination, about spirituality. It's about intuition, healing modalities, and personal growth in the arena of emotional maturity. So what I'm thinking is going back, it could be that you have some creative effort that you really wanted to get into. Like maybe you wanted to write music or write poetry, or maybe you wanted to learn a musical instrument. Maybe you wanted to pick up a spiritual discipline of some sort. Maybe, there's all kinds of things that have to do with creativity, imagination, and spirituality. Well, maybe you had those ideas, but maybe you didn't get as far as you wanted. Or maybe you say, yeah, I really wanted to follow up on that meditative, technique. I really wanted to follow up on that particular thing, and you didn't do it. Or maybe you did, but Saturn is just giving you one more little punch, I would say, of motivation and discipline and organization, and giving you a way to think about it and do it so that when you come out of that cycle, you go, yeah, I really established something new. And when you think about right now, the sun and, these new moons, and also Mercury being in basically Virgo, the habit forming sign, I think it's a really good kind of juxtaposition of those things coming together. So I would say, this is a time to really maybe establish some new patterns for quiet reflection, meditation, developing and using your intuition, or other habits that have to do with your spiritual discipline, that have to do with using discernment, that have to do with being the spiritual person, manipulating your life in a physical environment. So, if there was just something that intrigued you, you said, hey, I want to know more about that. Could have been aliens. I mean, it could have been anything. Could have been about medicine. It could have been about healing. So many different areas. Well, go back and just say, was there something I just didn't quite finish, or that I didn't quite think this through, or you want to develop a new habit? Saturn is the planet of discipline, order, structure, pulling things together, setting foundations. It's also the planet of commitment. So maybe that's all it takes, is just making a commitment to something that you just weren't too sure about. So and here again, when I give you all these ideas, I don't want you to ever take them and go, oh my God, I got to do this, got to do that. No, just pay attention. And if you hear something in your lifetime, if you hear something in this show and you go, ooh, that resonates with me, then that's the reason you're here. Just take that one thing, just take that one thing. So, moving to one more thing, we're going to look at Uranus moving retrograde on Friday. Now, Uranus, one more of those, what we call the outer planets, the ones that are the farthest from the sun. And they're out there, and they take years to go through a sign. Like Uranus takes 7 to 8 years to move through a sign. And remember, just recently, Uranus moved into Gemini. So, you know what? He's sitting at 1 degree of Gemini. Now, what I'd like to say about him is even though we call him the planet of rebellion and revolution, my favorite way to describe him is the great awakener, because Uranus resonates within us, in our psyches, as the need to break through, the need to shatter a limitation or something that's holding us back. And it does it on, a level of the community and of the world as well, but it's very personal. Something that here again, it could have been a habit, it could have been a routine, and we just thought we just have to do this always, always, always. Well, Uranus comes along and says, why? Why do you have to do it? But Uranus also doesn't slowly kind of erode something away. Uranus shatters it. So he is the great awakener. He awakens us to areas in our lives where we may be just like following old habits, following old belief systems. And yes, it may be uncomfortable, but he goes, come with me. We're just going to take the leap. We're going to shatter something. This is the Fool in the tarot card, so to speak. This is that energy of, I'm just going to take this leap. I don't know exactly what's going to happen maybe, but I know what I've got. I know where I am. So the Great Awakener, Uranus, is going to retrograde on Friday and then move back into the sign he came from. He's going to go back into Taurus on November 7th and retrace his steps back to 27 Taurus. So there again, if you're one of those people, maybe, and I also want to just say Scorpio, there's a lot of signs that are influenced by this. But as he goes back into Taurus, it is as if he left something undone. We're not quite finished with breaking through some of the habits, the routines, the beliefs, and traditions of Taurus. Taurus is the sign of traditions. So we're going back. We're going to break through some of those things. Then Uranus will return to direct motion in February 2026 and re-enter Gemini on April 25th. So here again, one thing we have been talking about is just this whole pattern that we've seen of those 4 planets, Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn, changing signs in 2025, but then retrograding. And so we're not going to see them back in those new signs until 2026. So the spring, the fall actually of 2025, and then the spring of 2026 is going to be phenomenal, because then those planets truly are going to be in those signs for a very long time. Neptune is going to be, in Aries for about 14 years. Uranus is going to be in Gemini for 7 or 8. These are long-term kinds of energies that we'll be really adjusting to. So that's another thing to consider. We're in a period of adjustment here. That's what's happening. And they're giving us the opportunity to go back. Did you forget something? On your way to the airport, did you forget something? Let's go back and pick it up. Let's go back and take this. Let's go take a look at this. But I also know with all these outer planets, sometimes people go, oh my, look at all the retrograde planets, which now includes Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And it sometimes makes us feel like we're moving backwards. But I want you to know, we're not moving backwards. We are simply kind of solidifying where we're going next. This is a dance. It's a process that builds. And by the way, most planets retrograde every single year. And those outer planets, they retrograde for months and months at a time. And there again, even though it's not astronomy, it is. Because it has to do with what it looks like from our position on Earth. And of course, we're much closer to the sun. And these guys, they're way out there. So what they look like to us, this optical illusion of them orbiting around us, that's what it looks like, right? But we know that's not true. But they stay retrograde every single year. I mean, this is not unusual to have this many planets retrograde. So don't worry about that. Don't let that get into your psyche or your consciousness. See it as an opportunity to slow down, take another look at something. And especially with Uranus, this is an opportunity for an awakening to figure out, is something holding you back? Do you feel like you're being held hostage, to a certain behavior or way of thinking? Do you want to align yourself with a new desire in your life or something that's been important and you just haven't ever pursued it? This is the time, make the breakthrough. And I also feel like, we talk about that all the time, at least I do. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. But do I really make it happen? Well, this is an opportunity. Use Saturn, the disciplinarian, to take those pieces and build something from them. So I'm going to leave this area with a quote from Winston Churchill. By the way, true confessions, I'm reading a biography of Churchill. I've always liked him because I found him a really fascinating character. Basically as a statesman, as the Prime Minister of England, but also I've always been intrigued because as I'm always looking at people's quotes based on their charts, so many of his are humorous. And that almost seems like an odd kind of thing, but I'm learning more about his personality, which is very interesting. And he was actually quite funny. He used humor to get across a lot of his points. But I wanted to give you this quote today because I think it's pretty pertinent. And to tell you that he had, now listen to all of these, Venus, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all retrograde in his chart when he was born. So anybody that thinks the retrograde planets are a curse, think again. Do you hear that? What is that? 5. Just an amazing number of planets, all retrograde in his chart. Now, here's what he said. It's a mistake to try to look too far ahead. The chain of destiny can only be grasped one link at a time. So there you have it. And he does have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto retrograde. So he's saying, yeah, we love to look ahead, but maybe it's a mistake to try to get too far ahead of ourselves because it's only one link at a time that we can really do anything about. Okay, so now I think we do have time to look at the full moon, total lunar eclipse that's going to be at 15 degrees of Pisces on Sunday. And so what's going to happen? That moon is going to slide into 15 Pisces. It's moving pretty quickly by comparison to all the other planets. And as it slips into that exact position opposing the sun at 15 Virgo, we will have a full moon because there again, the moon is reflecting the full light, the full gamut of all that energy that is coming from the sun. But in this particular case, because of where the Earth is located, those eclipses always have to do with the moon, the sun, and the Earth. And because of the position of it, what's going to happen is the moon is going to be totally eclipsed, as the Earth comes between the sun and the moon. Now, for those of you who haven't been following this, you can check your local listings for viewing information. But if I'm remembering correctly, this is one of those eclipses that is going to be seen in Europe and Asia, Australia, Africa, and I think from Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. But from North and South America, there's only very, very small pieces, small slices that will even just see a part of that eclipse. So but there again, if you want to see it, go check it out and see where you can, or you can also, follow it on the internet. You can literally watch it happening. But it doesn't matter whether you see it or not. In fact, Mo Abdelbaki, he's kind of superstitious about not watching eclipses, which I've always thought was kind of interesting because he's such a knowledge person. But he's kind of superstitious about them, and certain ones he'll watch and certain ones he won't. And I'm not superstitious that way. If I can see it, I'm going to see it. But Whether you see it or not, that's not what we're talking about today, because we're not talking astronomy. We're talking astrology. And astrologically speaking, we find great meaning in eclipses as harbingers of new information and impending change. Right? And that's what I've always seen. Like I said, it's always kind of interesting to see what starts happening around eclipses. And when I say around, it really is true. It may be a few weeks before, it could be a few weeks after. And because we always have two, it's quite the period of time, like 4 to 6 weeks that we're really looking at. But a full moon in general, remember, a full moon brings everything to light, the maximum amount of light that you can have. So it represents culminations and endings. It's saying this is as good as it gets. Now, when I say that, that doesn't mean you look at a situation in your life and say, oh, this is never going to change again. There is nothing happening here, blah, blah, blah. But recognize this is saying that and I always compare it to a production life cycle. If you were going to create a product, then the new moon would represent the beginning, the idea of the product. You're gathering your resources. You're figuring out your strategy. How am I going to put this together? How am I going to produce this? Do I need a staff? What is it going to look like? The architecture of it. So and this is how every idea really comes to culmination. You have this idea and you go through, and if you look at it like those moons, it's the crescent moon, it's building. This, the first quarter moon is where you kind of look at it and you go, oops, I forgot something. This isn't exactly, we got to tweak this architecture. We've got to tweak the plan. We got to change something. Then it builds and builds and builds until you get to the full moon. Well, the full moon represents the point at which you say, okay, I think we're ready to release it. We're ready to sell it. I'm ready to take it on the road. Or this is my book. I'm ready to start selling these ideas. And this book, I'm ready to give it to the people. In fact, in astrology, we call that stage of the moon right after the full moon the dissemination moon. The moon when we start putting it all out there. So once again, if you look at a lot of developmental life cycles, you'll see that they always follow something similar to this. So you go through the dissemination phase. Then you get to the last quarter. So once again, you're in an evaluation place. And you're saying, did it sell like I wanted to? Was this really what I wanted to accomplish? Sometimes that's when we get a little... We're frustrated. I mean, maybe we're celebrating or maybe we're frustrated because we see things we could have done better. So I'm going to revise that book and I'm going to, put out a second edition. Or I'm going to revise that that product. I'm always amazed at how many products come out every single year with the latest rendition. And I shouldn't say amazed, but that's what it is. It's like now the cap does this, it turns, it twists. And then next year, they're going to change that cap again because there were so many people who said, hey, that turning and twisting, that just didn't work. And oh my God, and so they're going to keep redoing that product over and over, like reinventing the plate, reinventing the cup, reinventing everything. And that's partially due to that last quarter phase of where we go, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What do we want to do different? But in that last stage also, then that's where we're coming to the place of we want to clear the decks again because we're ready for a new idea. Which is why for some people, when they get into that last week before the new moon or those last days before the full moon, and this, or the new moon rather, and it really depends on you as a personality. It depends probably on where the moon is at that time, but where it was in your chart. If you're a really lunar person and you're really affected by those waves in and out, some of those people will say, oh, there's such dark days, or I'm so depressed, or I just can't quite get energy. Other people are so excited because it's like, whoo, out with the old, in with the new. But those are the typical cycles we go through. So the eclipses just, in a sense, intensify that kind of energy. But generally, full moons represent the culmination. And then the new moons that is where the ending pretty much has happened, and we're ready for the new beginnings. But I like to say, because it feels like it's true to me, life doesn't usually have these really sharp demarcations where you go, okay, that's the end, this is the beginning. Endings always lead to new beginnings, and new beginnings always develop and end up in endings. So this is a circle. It's a cycle without real sharp demarcations in it. So don't get really all hung up about, oh, well, see, I said the full moon is the culmination, it's the ending. So, I can't be someplace else. Yes, you can. I'm just giving you kind of an idea about what mass consciousness is about it. So, yeah, this is the time when you're going, okay, I've taken this about as far as I can take it, or this is what it is. And then you will, maybe if it's something you really love, you'll revise it and bring it back. The new moon will give you an opportunity for those new beginnings. All right. So, this is a time when we've got the sun in one sign opposite the moon in the other sign. So right now we have got that sun sitting in Virgo, particular, practical, precise. And the moon is in that ethereal, dreamy Pisces. And we're pulling those two ideas together. And see, we're pulling those two ideas together in multiple ways because remember, we've got a similar situation in 2 weeks when both the sun and the moon will both be in Virgo. So see, right now, maybe it is the idea of feed your habits, feed, these endings with what are your dreams, especially Saturn moving into Pisces. Okay, so what is it you want to show more discipline in? What are those dreams? What are those ideas that you just haven't quite gotten to yet, or that you want to use as nutrition and feeding where you're going to go next? So, think about that, but also be aware of that new moon solar eclipse that's going to happen. 29 Virgo, last degree of Virgo. That's going to be Sunday, September 21st. So I think if there's anything that we can glean from a full moon in Pisces, especially one that is totally eclipsed by the sun in Virgo, it's that things are not always what they seem. Now, that's the other thing. We're talking about the ultimate opposite of the physical universe. We are talking about the mermaid, the ethereal energy that works in a completely different way, or would appear to, than our physical universe. By the way, that Pisces moon is also kind of the epitome of healing, and healing on an emotional, psychological level that then informs our physical body. Now, I'm not going to say that that means that you're going to be healed, but it brings our attention to healing on a level that is actually probably more powerful and more instructive than an aspirin, because it gets to what's really bugging us, or what's really eating at us, or what is going on in our psyche. So there's a lot of interesting things that could be going on with this eclipse in Pisces. And remember too, that eclipses really are like reboots. And we've all been through that, right? I've been through it a lot the last couple of weeks. I've been having some internet interruptions. I don't know what's going on, but sometimes it's just a matter of got to unplug the whole system and plug it back in. Give it the opportunity to reset. Clear the decks, clear it all out, and reset. And I think I myself have experienced this, and other people too, that sometimes that is what the eclipses feel like. Like all of a sudden everything went dark. And then when my mind, my heart, whatever came back on board, I go, oh, I didn't think about that before. It really was a reset. And so just allow that to be. And the other thing that's going on, and I notice this too, is the only connection the moon in Pisces is going to make right before opposing the sun in Virgo is an opposition to Mercury in Virgo. So once again, that underscores the theme that we've been talking about of how important our thoughts are, but also the clash between our hearts and our minds, Moon and Mercury. So I think that, sometimes these energies can be a little disorienting, but part of it is just this is what's going on. And part of the lesson is neither one is wrong. It's simply different. So I'd leave you with this. Adopt different perspectives, listen to different perspectives, be open to what you're hearing and thinking and being exposed to this week. And it's likely the ideas may contradict each other. They may be really different, but ask yourself, are you willing to entertain a change of mind? Are you willing to rethink putting your faith in an idea, person, program, or belief system that, is unquestioning? And that was kind of a psychic thing that came to me. I thought this could be a whole lot about mentors and teachers and spiritual gurus and coaches and influencers, and just thinking, who are the people or the ideas that we just keep following, including me, by the way? Don't follow me, if it doesn't make sense to you. This is a time to truly be that hermit and say, I'm going to know the truth for myself. So if you're involved with a person or an organization or a system that doesn't allow you to ask questions, that ought to be a red flag. Okay? So that's what I would say about this eclipse. This is about questioning and really, letting your heart teach you, or letting the energy kind of come in and teach you about what is the truth for you. And here's one quote. This is by Johann, Wolfgang von Goethe. I don't know, how do you say his name? Goethe. And he was born on a full moon in Pisces. And he says, a man sees in the world what he carries in his heart. So think about that. That's very much like this eclipse. Okay, we got to wrap it up and get going. Heads up, next week is relatively quiet. We got some good stuff going on, but nothing like what's going on now. We're in the valley between those two eclipses. So we'll get a little respite next week. So thank you very much for joining me today. And thanks to our producer, Serena. I hope that you will stay tuned for Empowerment. That comes up next on 12radio.com with Kelly Whetstone. And she's also on YouTube. And I believe that there might be a link on my page right now for my show telling you how to connect to Kelly on that Empowerment with Kelly Whetstone show. So if you can listen 12 radio, you can listen on YouTube. So everybody, here's the final quote, and then we're going to wrap it up. And this is by William Faulkner, who did have Virgo, or has Mercury in Virgo. And it just sounds so perfect. Read everything, trash, classics, good and bad, and see how they do it. Just like a carpenter who works as an apprentice and studies the master. Read, you'll absorb it, and then write. If it's good, you'll find out. If it's not, throw it out the window. So that sounds like Mercury in Virgo. This is CA signing out. Please come and find me on 12listen.com. Feel free to request a scheduled call on a day and a time that's good for you. You have been listening to Everyday Astrology on 12radio.com and live streaming on YouTube, Everyday Astrology with CA Brooks, where we are changing the way we listen to the world.